On this episode of Creature Features, we're going to look at a group of animals called echinoderms.
So the first couple of animals that we're going to look at that I collected from St. Joe Bay are both in the same phylum. That's a very large classification. And they're in the phylum Echinodermata. That means they're echinoderms. And the Latin meaning of that would be spiny skin. This first animal is a starfish, or really a more accurate name would be a sea star, since it's not a fish at all. And all echinoderms, including this starfish, have radial symmetry, which means if we sort of folded them in half down the middle, one side would be identical or symmetrical to the other side. And you can see that this sea star, like most species of sea stars, have 5 legs, although there are sea stars that have more than 5 legs. And the cool thing about sea stars is they're one of the animals that can actually regenerate limbs. So if one of its legs was broken off by another animal or bitten, it could actually regrow that leg. And it also has 5 eyes. There's an eye on the very tip of every one of the legs. So that means that animal can see 360 degrees around all the time by having an eye on the end of each one of those legs. All right, we're going to move over here to the other echinoderm that I collected. And these are both the same animal. There's a large one and a small one. Those are sea urchins. And you can see that the larger one has some little bits of shell and crushed up coral. And those were in the tank that I put it in. And it actually picked those up and moved them to the top of the body. So when you're out in St. Joe Bay, you'll see something similar to that. You'll see urchins with little bits of shell or maybe seagrass on top of their bodies. You can see they're moving around a little bit. The little tube feet are moving them on top of the urchin. And they're not really sure why urchins do that. A couple of hypotheses are that they're trying to camouflage themselves so they would blend in better with the bottom if they put little bits off the bottom on top of themselves. And the other theory is that maybe they're sensitive to light, so they're trying to shade themselves by putting things on top of their body. Now I'm going to come down and we're going to look at a trait that both of these echinoderms have in common, and that is that they have these soft feet called tube feet. So on that sea star, you can see them sort of stretched out on the bottom of the legs, and they're moving. They're bright orange color. Those are the tube feet on the sea star. So they would be down on the bottom in the sand, and they would move the animal along the bottom, but then they can also pick up little bits of food, little pieces of dead stuff, or maybe live little worms that might be in the sand, and they can pass it from foot to foot all the way till they get to the center of the animal on the bottom where the mouth is. And I'm going to flip him over. You can see that starfish is kind of arching himself up, trying to turn himself back over. You can see those little tube feet stretching out. There's just rows of them. Now, when we look at our urchin, it's a little harder to see because they're not a bright orange. But the urchin has the long, really sharp spines that it uses for locomotion to move itself. But in between those spines, you can see these long, thin, stringy-looking things that are waving around. They'd have a little suction-like cup mechanism on the end, and those are the tube feet of the urchin. So it's using the sharp spines for protection and for locomotion, but then it's using those little tube feet, again, just like the starfish, to pass food that it finds to the mouth. And then it's also holding those little bits of shell on top of its body with those tube feet. Now if I turn that urchin over, its mouth is right in the center, just like the starfish. Inside that urchin's mouth, there are 5 teeth that come together and they sort of form like a little pyramid. So that urchin extends those teeth out and it grazes on algae, it eats seagrass. Okay, so the sea star and the sea urchins are echinoderms. Also in that phylum would be sand dollars and sea cucumbers.